All right. We're going to get started here. Our next panel is going to explore how philanthropy and corporations can be more proactive in working to solve economic, environmental, and social issues. And Susan Hoff from the United Way is going to moderate. So I'm just going to get out of the way and let you all take it away.
Thank you, Alfreda. Okay, is this mic on? Yes, it is. All right. I don't know if your guys' mics are on or not, but if you're saying anything about me, just put the mic down if you're talking amongst yourselves. So it's great to see all of you again, and welcome. And as you saw, and thank you, Alfreda, from the introduction, we have an incredibly distinguished panel of experts with us. We have Janiece Evans-Page, who is the CEO of Tides. We have Nicole Anderson, who is the president of the AT&T Foundation, and Noelle LeVeaux, who is the chief marketing officer of the Communities Foundation of Texas. And you know, I raise my hand every time to be a facilitator of a panel, because all I have to do is find really smart people and ask like one or two questions, and that's it. So, you know, so that's another one of my secret tricks. But let me just set this up a little bit. In November 2019, many years ago, it feels like, Tides published a piece entitled Get Off Your Assets, which we here at Big Bang shamelessly co-opted as the title for today's discussion. But I want to read just a brief excerpt from this. As public charities who partner with donors on their philanthropy, shouldn't we be held to a higher standard than just the total assets under management and volume of grants in and grants out? At this time of peril, we need to be asking ourselves tougher questions. What are we really fighting for? What change do we want to see in the world? And how can we use our power networks and resources to get there? Our democracy is fraying, the world is burning, communities of color are under siege, and there's a refugee crisis at our border. Philanthropy needs to take a more proactive and principled approach on the big issues of our time. If not now, when? And again, this was a pre-pandemic missive, but it's an excellent introduction for today's discussion. So let's just kick it off by asking each of our panelists to give a brief overview of themselves and their organization. So I'll start with you, Janiece.
Thank you. Good morning, good day to all of you, and I'm thrilled to be back in Dallas. I've been away a couple of months. Janiece Evans-Page, and I won't go into my long history, but my last chapter prior to Tides, I was at Fossil, leading social impact and environmental impact as Chief Sustainability Officer, and then later also as Chief Diversity Officer. Prior to that, I had an extensive career in high tech at Hewlett-Packard in a myriad of roles, leading business units, but the core for me was always about making an impact, and preferably making an impact in communities of color. So I've been able to pivot in that regards in terms of finding a space to hopefully make the biggest impact possible. In terms of Tides, I am honored, and my boss is here. I know she wasn't expecting that shout out, but Rosin Dawson-Thompson, who is now chair of our board, joined the organization in January. And we're a social impact organization and a nonprofit accelerator whose intent is to create a world of shared prosperity and social justice. And our superpowers for doing that are myriad of superpowers. We'll talk about some of those today in terms of bringing together like-minded donors, whether those are individuals, whether those are corporations, whether those are foundations, who really have a commitment to social change. And we do that by also ensuring that front and center are proximate leaders, BIPOC leaders on the ground creating change. So we also have a fiscal sponsorship model where we provide capacity building to a myriad of nonprofits or social ventures. And there are a bunch of other levers that we pull in terms of driving social change, including impact investing, social purpose real estate, et cetera. So I'm honored to be here with my friends.
Thank you. Nicole, we'll just go down the line.
I can't believe Janiece didn't say that in her previous life she was my boss. So, I think that was the highlight of your career.
She was one of my references, let me just say that.
I'm just going to go out there and say that. So I'm Nicole Anderson. I'm president of the AT&T Foundation and work in our corporate social responsibility organization at AT&T. I've been part of that organization for going on 12 years now and part of AT&T for 18. So here in Dallas for those past 12 years. we are focused on, and I know it's just really great to be here in person. I was starting to recognize folks as I was coming in, like, gosh, it's been a while since we've all seen each other, and to see the bottom half of your face is also delightful as well. So thank you all for being here today with us. So AT&T, we'll talk about it today. We've obviously made some pretty big pivots with the onset of COVID. We've always been in the education space, have had a long commitment to helping young people, especially those who are underserved. We call them opportunity youth, but just all those young people who are looking to improve their lives and their families' lives. First, helping them just graduate high school was a long goal we had with Aspire for over 10 years. That was our signature initiative on those skills to graduate high school, and then setting you up for career skills for life and workforce readiness. We've pivoted that work to where we've all seen an incredible need emerge. Although we've all known here in this room, the digital divide has been with us for a long time. COVID just really put a spotlight on that. So we have been focusing all our work on bridging the digital divide and made a $2 billion commitment earlier this year to address that. So I'll get into more of that, our AT&T Connected Learning Program, but just happy to be here with all of you. So thank you.
Thanks. Noelle?
Good morning. I'm not actually on. Sure. Hey, okay. My name's Noelle LeVeaux. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Communities Foundation of Texas. I have been in marketing for 27 years, but a lot of my focus has been in nonprofits. I was the CMO at Visit Dallas. I launched the BIG campaign, if anyone remembers that, where you are the I in BIG. And so investing in the community has always been really important to me. I started Dress for Success Dallas here, and also led Helping Hands for Single Moms as well. So those are kind of some of my personal passion projects in the community. And then also within my career, I love marketing, but I also love telling people about really great things. And so I loved joining CFT last year in the midst of the pandemic. I actually joined in July of 2020. But really, my job is to get the word out about the great things that we do. And so it's a pretty easy job to do. Communities Foundation, if you are not familiar with us, we are your community foundation. Our goal is to improve the lives of all citizens in our region, and we do that by investing in their health, wealth, living, and learning. And we do that by advancing community equity, by expanding community impact, and by growing community assets. And so one of the main things that you probably know us for is North Texas Giving Day, where we raised how much money last week? $66 million. Just wanted to see if anyone else in the room knew. $66 million for the community last year, and we're really proud of that. But what we are most proud of is being able to be a convener and a collaborator. And a lot of people sitting in this room we've done a lot of work with, and we know that our collective impact is what really will make a difference in North Texas. And so I think we're going to talk a little more about that today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Welcome, ladies. So if we're thinking about the title of this conference, which is New Economy, Healing Divides, when we were contemplating and talking about this, we said, philanthropy is a pretty divided industry if you think about it. It is the people who have the resources, traditionally, determining who's worthy for investment, and the people with the money get to pick who the money goes to. So when we think about healing that divide or bridging that gap, perhaps, what are each of your organizations doing in that space? We're going to start with you, Janiece.
Yeah, there's a lot I think that we're doing and others are doing, and you'll hear more about that as well. But when we talk about just the time we're in, and we talk about healing in particular, I think last year really exacerbated a lot of the problems we've been talking about forever. So as we talk about social justice, as we speak to racial justice, as we speak to economic justice, as we talk about environmental justice, I think last year put all of these issues front and center, that progress has been slow. And so I've been emphatic that I am at this point extremely eager. There's a lot of anxiety, but also impatient in terms of the progress that we all need to make moving forward. And so our approach right now is really to reimagine what impact should look like, not just for us, but for our partners. Thinking about shifting power, thinking about our work being more equity-centered. How do we move more resources to those leaders who are proximate, that are really the innovators on the ground? And so we're very intentional right now in going through a strategic process to look at how we're going to get off those assets, how we're going to inspire our partners to get off those assets faster. Last year, we saw many breakthroughs in philanthropy, in particular in terms of what we call trust-based philanthropy. Wow, what a concept, trust. where we're not going to ask for eons and eons of paper, where we're going to trust that the leaders on the ground are doing the work that they're committed to do. So that's one of a bunch of ways that we're thinking about how do we, as an intermediary, play a significant role in getting folks to get off those assets and really thinking about system change differently.
So just a follow-up question there. When we were visiting before, one of the things that you said that really struck with me is that progressives, and you told me it was okay to say this, right? Progressives fund.
Okay, what did I
I was
say?
like, which thing did she say? I'm sure you said whatever you said, it was fine. Progressives fund a lot of stuff, and we get that, and sometimes, and I will certainly use United Way as an example. We used to say our model was sort of sprinkling goodness. It was 10 miles wide and quarter-inch thick. How, when you're so broad, and so how do you move from that very broad-based, as you talked about, because there are a lot of things that need resources, how do you get targeted, but at the same time move fast? So how do you balance that need to go fast, get off your assets, but also become more strategic?
I think what has slowed us down in some cases is the bureaucracy that we've imposed in philanthropy. So even now, as we think about our shift of equity-centered work, what does that look like? Folks say, well, what about education? What about the arts? What about climate justice, et cetera? And I think in some cases that has slowed us down. So when you think about moving faster, the things that we're looking at right now, as I mentioned before, is do we need all of the bureaucratic processes we put in place? I know it slows us down, right? And is it really creating change? Is it really making the impact because we now have 10 documents instead of 2, right? The other thing that we're aligning like-minded partners, right? So up front, are these folks that are really committed to this work? And I think that's an important conversation to have as well. Some of the slowness is because there's not really trust that you're really going to do what you said you're going to do. 3 is, I think once we're aligned that this is really about system change, is how do we really collaborate with others instead of repeating some of the things that we know have been broken. One of the things that I've talked about, and I know when we have the call, is in terms of being impatient. I worked on digital divide 20 years ago at HP. And at that time, it was considered one of the breakthrough initiatives, e-inclusion, incredible progress, system change, et cetera. And last year, as Nicole was talking about digital divide, the same issues that we were talking about 20 years ago in Silicon Valley, not only in underserved communities, but around the world, are the same issues we're talking about. So I think now when we talk about moving faster, is let's be intentional about that in terms of really looking at additive programs, because we also know what doesn't work, right? And I think we sometimes take comfort, even though we know some of these proven or some of these programs don't work. So I think this is an opportunity to kind of reimagine, but to move a little faster.
Thanks.
So can I respond to that
Yes.
first question too? Because I think that intentionality is extremely important. But I also think that with that, you have to start from the inside. So one thing at Communities Foundation of Texas that we've done is taken our entire staff and immerse them in racial training, unbiased, unconscious bias. And really, it's been a journey. But at the same time, we decided that that didn't mean that we weren't going to also focus on the outside. So I don't think you can wait, because we'll never all be fixed on our racial issues that we have. But I do think you have to teach people, how to really understand their own biases that they have, and also to understand history. And we talked quite a bit about history, that you really do have to understand your history, because then you will understand that there are certain things that just are no longer tolerable. Right, and that for many, many seasons, we accepted certain behaviors, and we can't accept those behaviors anymore. We have to work harder to make those shifts. But so the first thing is, you really have to teach people to understand the racial disparities that exist and to believe them, right? Because the truth is that this has got to come from the heart. We oftentimes use the word equity lens, and I know that everyone uses it. For me, it kind of gets under my skin, because I feel like a lens is something you take on and you put on and you take off. And for me, I feel like, no, this has to be something that is inherent, right? Something that we believe every single day. So we don't have to question, oh, did we think about equity this time? We have to always think about it. So I think we have to start internally. Then the other piece for us is we've been doing a lot of this, and maybe we haven't been bringing enough people along, or maybe it has seemed like a one-off for some, and we have to continue to scale some of the things that we've already done. And so I think we're focused on that. How do we bring out those things that we have done previously that have worked and how do we replicate those pieces? And then the final thing I would say in regard to education, particularly in Texas, it is about equity. I was on a call with Dr. Hinojosa yesterday, and when you think about what DISD looks like, if we can really lean in there and ensure that those kids get a certification or a degree that allows them to have a living wage and to take their families out of the existing situations that they are in, we will help move the needle in equity. And so Educate Texas, which is also a part of Communities Foundation of Texas, I mean, that is their focus, is really helping African American, Latino children, first generation, and underrepresented students finish high school, get a degree or a certification that will allow them to live a healthy and thriving life. And those are the things that I think we have to really focus on to ensure that we aren't talking about this 20 years from now again.
No, good point. I mean, echoing what Janiece said, we've done it. And I was thinking about the young man who asked the question, the frustration is we have been talking about an awful lot of these things for a really long time. How do you change it? And I love the idea of saying a lens. Is that really the right word we mean? Because a lens is something that you take on and off. It is how do you change your entire focus without saying, yeah, sometimes I put my equity lens on and sometimes I just look at them with my regular glasses. Good, really good words. So, Nicole, same question.
Sure. No, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff to unpack up here. So I would say for us, just rolling back the calendar to 18 months when this all came to light. I mean, many things that we all knew, but I think for us, it was really just fundamentally a stress test of our philanthropic practice at AT&T, right? So we have built for a long time those relationships, and what was truly gratifying, although it was incredibly stressful and trying, was the relationships we had already with the education nonprofits. So we heard from them directly of what they were facing. And some small steps, I know other corporate philanthropy groups did this as well, was to say, we're taking off restrictions on any funding we already have with you, right? Like, what you need to do right now in your communities, go do it. And you don't need to fill out the paperwork on how we're gonna redirect this fund and put a note in the file and all that good stuff. So just go move and go do what you need to do. And oh, by the way, what do you need to do? And so very quickly we heard from our ed tech entrepreneurs, especially. We've hosted an accelerator for 6 years now where we work with ed tech companies, and they were like, we are getting inundated, right? When 50 million students all of a sudden have to learn virtually, those digital platforms they ran were inundated, right? So just scaling that network, it's like, well, that's what we do, right? So let's help you fund and let's help you get that rolling. And that led immediately to our distance learning fund, which was one of the quick things we did in the beginning days of 2020 when this was all hitting. But I think it also just took us back to our roots. So fundamentally, what is AT&T about? Authentically, we're about broadband and we're about connectivity, and we're about doing that well. And so I think for us, I mean, I know people talk about the silver linings. I think for us, it was just a really good refocus to say, this is what we're really strong at, so let's make this also how we do our corporate and community work. Which was also painful, right? We had to say goodbye to a lot of relationships we had in the work we'd done in education, but we focused, and I know that was another conversation coming up, right? Like, you can do a lot, or you can really get tight and focus on what's needed. For 95% of us, the network worked. We had broadband, we could transition, we could go do our work online. For 5%, it really didn't work, and it didn't exist, and 17 million kids just, poof, couldn't connect. And so I think what's been good in this is that the 95% heard that story of what that really meant. And for us internally, that also allowed us to pivot and move. We had a CEO transition because we should have one of those in the midst of a pandemic just to add on to everything else that was happening. But I mean, I think that also just brought us the ability to refocus, to take a look at who we are authentically. AT&T has been around universal service for over 100 years, and do that in partnership, and that we couldn't do it alone, right, to make that work happen. I think the equity question also really comes into play now with the federal, all the money that's flowing in to municipalities and into communities to help bridge the digital divide. And how do you make sure that that's being dispersed equitably and going into the communities where it's really needed? So that's the next piece of the work, right? We're gonna keep working on this. Technology keeps changing. The divide is gonna be there, but how can you make sure to stem it as much as possible and bring all those communities into the conversation? So
Great. Charlene Lake, who is Chief Sustainability Officer at AT&T, close to the hearts of all of us. She's also the board chair of United Way. She said a couple of weeks ago, it's probably not even that long, she said something that was so profound. She said, connectivity is a key social determinant of health. Was like, that it was so succinct and so perfect. But yeah, it was, yeah.
No, and I think she's encapsulating. So Charlene's my boss. I'm just surrounded by like incredibly strong women who teach me how to live my life every day. But I think the digital divide for us, I mean, we are right now with what we call the homework gap, right? So kids who can't access at home aren't able, which we all called homework gap before, and now is just school gap. But we know digital divide, that may be the first place we're going deep into because it was the most immediate need and where we had our background. But it very much is also health. It's also workforce and economics, right? So all of that is the digital divide. If you don't have that access and availability, you can't reach that. So
no,
100%.
no. Clearly so. So shift a little bit. Noelle, you, again, congratulations on North Texas Giving Day. $66 million, another record-breaking year. Fabulous work there. And one of the things that Giving Day does is it allows in some ways it democratizes giving because it gives everybody the opportunity, and many people the opportunity to give and designate toward a charity of their choice. At the same time, I know that CFT has such a focus on targeted impact. So how do you balance that broad opportunity for designation with driving targeted impact in the areas that are key to you: economic stability, education, and increasingly health as well?
Sure. We do believe in the democracy of giving, right? And so it is important to be able to allow everybody the opportunity to give. We believe that thriving communities are built on more people giving, which is why growing community giving is really important, so that you know what's happening in your community, and giving to those causes is extremely important. For our donor advised funds, for example, we do advise on about a third of our donor advised funds. So our philanthropy team works on advising with in any size donor. So our larger foundations as well as just an individual donor. So we do have advising and counseling that we give there. Obviously, we also have funds of our own, interest funds that we have. And last year, I think, was exceptional in really being able to create in collaboration with, like I said, many in this room, 9 COVID funds, right? So funds that really targeted specific areas. So we continue to build funds to really address the greatest needs in the community. And then we try to help people find those funds and find those areas. So the great thing about North Texas Giving Day is that there are over 3,000 nonprofits on that website that you can go and learn about. So there are cause areas. You can go search those cause areas. You can also search by which of those organizations are led by individuals of color or BIPOC leaders. You can, search what areas they're in. So what we try to do is drive people towards the needs. But we do believe that people should give to those things that they are passionate around. But obviously also with the funds that we create, we make sure that we're addressing the greatest need, such as education. Our investment in Educate Texas is because we know that is where we will move the needle.
No, thanks. So kind of same question for you, Janiece. I know that you guys were one of the early donor advised funds creators. So, which is interesting, again, because you're such a progressive organization. And I think oftentimes we think of DAFs or donor advised funds as more of a conservative kind of mechanism for giving, which
Progressives like donor advised funds too.
Progressives like stuff too. So I'm wondering, and in looking at your literature and work, how, what is that line between advising and giving freedom? Because you hit the nail on the head. You believe in the democratization or democracy of giving and give to your choice. Do you draw the line anywhere, Janiece?
Yes, we do. So it's a similar model in terms of us also having DAFs as a part of our infrastructure. So we were one of the first to create DAFs 45 years ago. I think the difference for us, we have a model as well, where we have a myriad of advisors who work closely with individuals, foundations, and companies in terms of advancing their respective strategies. But the key for us, as I mentioned before, is about creating the world of shared prosperity and social justice. So it is not just spray and pray in terms of anything that you want to donate to. We are very intentional in terms of applying, like you said, not the equity lens, but being equity centered in terms of the conversations that we have with our donors. And so most of the DAFs, I would say 90% are truly aligned with social justice.
Thanks. So let's shift back to digital divide, Nicole. In terms of alignment, and you described that so well. I mean, in corporate alignment, need-based, but you also had a long time focus of education broadly, particularly in the area of opportunity and youth. In fact, I think when I came to United Way about the same time you came to AT&T working on some America's Promise things. Now that just popped in my head. I remember that whole thing. Yeah, that was an adventure. Yeah, we were both brand new. But how do you, again, if you make a shift, how is that informed? Is it, combination external, internal, community? Talk a little bit about how that process.
How that comes to be. It's a mix of all of that, right? So I think for the pandemic hitting and the CEO transition we had just gave us a very clear opportunity to make that shift. I would say within our CSR team, right, we knew digital divide was an issue we needed to be working on, and we can address it through workforce readiness and high school success, and those are key things we need to be working on, and it gave us tremendous experience in the education space and understanding of what moves the needle for these young people and how to build successful programs. And so I would say we're still in education. We just pivoted where we could make that connection really work. Our company also went through some transitions too, right? So we're spinning off. We partnered with Warner Media, we had DirecTV come in, right? So we were moving in multiple ways and moving more into a media space. That's now contracting back, right? And we're coming back into our network, our connectivity space. So it just made sense to be there as well. So I think all those things coming together kind of set the lens. We talked a little bit before about moving faster. That's actually one of the cultural pillars of AT&T, one of the 4 or 5. I should know them all by heart, but the big one is move faster. And so that too was something we looked at, right? Our CEO was like, well, if we're going to be focused here, then you can start to move really fast, right? Because the decisions, like what you're not going to go do is very clear, and where you're going to direct your funding becomes very clear. And then we also made some internal changes just for us to be able to move those funds out faster, right? Instead of having to go through all the layers of what we needed to do before. So I think it was all in there already, and just the information we had from our partners and the NGOs we've worked with on what they were facing and where they were heading. So,
I just want to jump in on the move faster, because I think that the pandemic really showed us that we can move faster.
Yep.
And not just by ourselves. Collectively, we can move faster. And we talked about an example, Get Shift Done. And it also, I think, is a different divide. When the pandemic hit, there was a real divide between the white collar and blue collar types of jobs, right? So restaurant people, hourly wage folks were losing their jobs as things were closing. Many of us went home to our offices and just started working at home in the same way. But people in restaurants and a lot of the service organizations were losing their jobs. And then obviously there was a significant increase in the need for food. So the food banks, as we all remember, all the lines wrapped around of people that then needed food. And so Get Shift Done was a program that brought in several organizations, several funders, to make sure that we raised the money. And I just got some new stats. We started it here, and it's now in 11 other regions. So 12 regions came together. But in North Texas alone, it helped 36 nonprofits raise $5 million in wages. So employees of restaurants then went and worked at these nonprofits, and this fund paid them to go do that. So 20,000 workers with 320,000 hours, right? And that was one of those things that we would have never thought we could do that. That was like in 30, 60 days that was propped up and people were working. So we can move faster, right? And we can move faster together. Usually we think we can only move faster if we're doing it alone, and we can make all the decisions and all the choices. But I think the pandemic really taught us that we can move faster. We helped to mobilize, since March of 2020, over $300 million into the community, which would have seemed impossible to us, I think, before March of 2020. So $300 million back into the community through COVID funds, North Texas Cares, now 3 giving days, obviously our donor advised funds, our 9 COVID relief funds. So we can move faster. I think one of the questions is, why don't we do that more often? And how do we make sure that we don't go back to our old ways, where we're all trying to do our own thing separately, slowly, lots of approvals, and red tape? And I really think that's something that we need to come around. how do we make sure the things that we learned during the pandemic that helped us be better and have great
Information for us within shifting our focus to where it's authentically linked has also just brought the whole power of the corporation behind the work we're doing. So I think in a lot of corporate philanthropy, right, it sometimes is a siloed entity of the business, or it's there. The folks who do it really well, I think, are able to integrate it into what their purpose is as a business. And so that has been really exciting to see, like, once you are in that machine, so to speak, the momentum of the change you can do, and especially with an issue like this where you do have all the policy reform happening and you have the funds flowing in, you have to have public-private partnerships, you have to bring nonprofits with you because they're the ones who everyone's going to lean on to get the work done in the communities. And so I think us bringing that from a CSR lens to the corporate table has been really transformational, and that's a different shift to how we do that work, which is exciting.
Good point. Yeah, and again, one of the things that Dr. Pastor said that really struck with me is it's really hard when you're in the middle of a crisis or pandemic or anything to see all that's going on. But what I hear you saying is, philanthropy, and you three in particular and your organizations really have lifted your heads up and said, okay, I see what's happening. It's going to influence how we're working. And to your point, Noelle, let's not go backwards because it is, we're creatures of habit. You think, oh, well, everything's changed in the world. But honestly, when we go back to the office, you get up, you put your shoes on, and you drive to work the same way you did before. So how do you make things really stick?
Well, I see crisis a little differently, and I loved everything that the doctor said. But what I will say about crisis is that I actually think you see things clearer. And that's from a personal perspective. I was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 41, and then all of a sudden everything was very clear to me. You really start to understand what's important, where you need to spend your time and your resources, and it changes things. And sometimes when I talk about it, it's like you're on a carousel of life, right? And there's very few things that stop the carousel. You pile a bunch of stuff on, right? You can go through a lot of trauma, and the carousel is still moving. And then every once in a while, something comes around that just stops the carousel, and you're frozen, and you can see clearly. And I think that the pandemic, which was a crisis that we were all experiencing at the same time together, actually brought a lot of clarity to us as to what is important. And then obviously the murder of George Floyd, in the midst of that as well. It's just, I actually think in crisis, you do shed things that aren't important and that you've been wasting your time and resources on, right? So honestly, what I believe is that we are still in a crisis. Forget which one you want to call it, whether it's the pandemic or racial disparities. We have to move consistently as if we are in a crisis, because I believe that we are. And I think the doctor talked about that earlier today. So I think what we really have to decide is that we are as passionate about saving our neighbors and each other from what is happening to people every single day in our country and around the world, and believe that we're in crisis mode. And therefore, that means we still need to think about the tools that we used in crisis mode, and we need to use those every day.
Yeah. And look what happened when we were. Get Shift Done is a tremendous example, but there's so many more that, I think of also the North Texas Cares Fund. I mean, that was close to 50 funders around the table who many of them never really spoke to each other more than maybe once or twice a year, who all got together in a virtual world and drove work forward.
Yeah, and one of the greatest parts of the North Texas Cares Fund was that it was one application, right? So nonprofits could apply through one application versus having to find all the different places where they might be able to find funding to be able to carry on the good work that they were trying to do in the midst of a pandemic. So it was great that the funders came together, but the actual process, like you were talking about before, no, we're not going to make you jump through all these hoops to get to the funding, because we do have to escalate the way that we move money from the foundations and organizations back into the community. And those types of programs allowed us to do that.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that makes me uneasy, where I have some anxieties when we talk about this crisis, because if you talk to Black and brown communities, that crisis existed before the pandemic. And so one of the conversations we're having now is about shifts in power, right? And the fact that we need to be more intentional about moving those resources to Black and brown leaders on the ground who are closest to the problems that need to be solved. So I do speak to the fact that, yes, for some donors, there was an epiphany last year in terms of the pandemic, and still. But I think if you talk to a lot of these communities, the issues were exacerbated last year during the pandemic and continue, as well as racial reckoning, which they've been reckoning with racism for a while. So I think what we saw last year really is just some breakthroughs for folks to realize these issues we've been talking about are real, right? And how do we start really changing these systems? And some of that starts with changing or shifting power, and even in the field of philanthropy, right? And I think sometimes we're uncomfortable talking about that, where the money comes from, right? But how do we become more courageous and have conversations with those donors about shifting power and allowing those on the ground to really innovate some different solutions?
No.
Because soon we'll have a workforce crisis. I mean, I hope everybody knows that. The equity problem that we have, and I'll look over to AT&T, but as the world continues to brown, if we do not fix things like equity for students in DISD, we will have a workforce issue. So it is a crisis, right? It was a crisis for many, but it will continue to be a crisis for us. We have to think not 2, 3, 5 years ahead. We have to think 7, 10, 15, 20 years ahead, and it will be another significant crisis if we don't handle it now.
Right. No, and I'm thinking back, Nicole, one of the things I thought is, education is absolutely so centrally important, but if you back up, okay, what are root causes? Well, if connectivity, which, is a systemic barrier to good health, which is a challenge. If you don't have your health when you get to school, you're going to be behind, which if you're in a homework gap, you're going to be behind, and then a workforce gap, which again leads to continuing the health cycle too. So, thinking about those root causes, moving from transactional to transformational, and really examining shift of power and proximity, who is helping influence and drive those decisions, are all key. So we have about a couple minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you real quick. These are like real fast, one word. So here you go. So in terms of bridging gaps and healing divides, you got 3 things you can say. What's the greatest progress so far, biggest challenge ahead, and your greatest opportunity? Who would like to go first? Do you want to go first?
Am I supposed to answer all 3 of those?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but fast.
Bring them back
fast.
to me. Bring 'em
Okay,
back.
you got greatest progress, biggest challenge, greatest opportunity ahead.
Okay, so progress, we talk about it now. I mean, that's progress. Because it was behind doors and in individual communities for a long time. So I do think that's progress. Challenge, talking to action. And then the last one was
Greatest opportunity ahead.
opportunity, the youth. I am raising 2 teenage girls, so please pray for me every day. And as much as they drive me crazy, they also give me a lot of hope, And so also when I see some of the kids, young adults here at Paul Quinn, the youth, I really do believe that they will demand a different world from us. Mine demanded of me every single day, but they are my greatest hope.
Agree. Nicole?
Sure. So I would say our greatest success, it's small, but it gives us hope that we're moving in the right path. So I think one would just be that we've set up this internal framework and have established the Connected Learning initiative, so we know which way we're heading. And within that, we've connected 40,000 of the most vulnerable, so English language learners, homeless students, connected them with a Wi-Fi hotspot and with a zero-rated data plan for over a year, right? So that sounds very simple, but at least it's a connection. And then obviously we have the digital literacy pieces and the device refurbishers we'll work with to just get folks connected and get them to understand and feel comfortable and fluid online. So I think a lot of what we take for granted in how you do a search, how you send an email, how you set up your Wi-Fi router, how you set up your password. These are huge barriers to just getting connected and getting on board and understanding the positivity that can do. So I think that was an early win in just getting that moving, but there's so much more ahead to do. And I would say both the challenge and the opportunity are combined, right? So the opportunity is the 17 million kids who need a permanent solution to get online. And I think the number is 4 million who just completely disappeared when we all went virtual, right? So that's a massive learning loss. So how do you get there? And that's also the challenge, right? The challenge to all of us is we have to do it together. This is not going to just be resolved by business. It's not going to be resolved only by government policy. It's a combination of all of those. So I would say that's the challenge and the opportunity are the same for me.
Thank you. All right, Janiece.
I'm still in California time, so I'm not quite where you all are. One more time. Greatest success.
So wins, challenges ahead. and opportunity?
Yeah, I would say greatest success, and I think we have to seize this opportunity or just the resources that are currently available. Most of us saw unprecedented growth last year, and I think that's a win, right? So the appetite for change is there. How do we mobilize maybe the opportunity? You know, how do we mobilize that now? As we were talking about moving faster, I think is the opportunity for us.
Thank you, ladies. Please join me in thanking such an amazing brain trust. Oh, thank you.
I wanted to climb the steps. Well, get off your assets. I think we've been inspired. That was a great talk, and thank you, ladies, for that.